Hello everyone, welcome back to Psychology 32, Lifespan Development, and today we're going to talk about Chapter 10, the play years, psychosocial development. One thing you might notice is that this slide deck looks a little bit different than your slide deck. I've made some edits and some revisions. I added one or two slides. I added a couple of different topics, so it might look a little bit different, but it's not sort of markedly different from your slide deck. So just take some notes off of this one, and you can always edit your slide deck as necessary. Okay? All right, we're going to talk about emotion regulation, Erikson's third stage, motivation, psychopathology, which is a fancy way of saying abnormal psychology, parenting styles, discipline, and gender development. Okay? I'm going to try to keep this video in under an hour. At the end of the video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the assignment for Let's Do This Week. I might even post I'm going to post a document that will help you with the assignment this week. Okay? All right. So, emotion regulation. Between the ages of 2 and 6, what we call the play years, it's expected that the child will begin to start displaying a certain amount of what we call emotion regulation, the ability to control or regulate his or her emotions. Children at this age will still tantrum, but as you move on and as the child gets older, they should start to get to the point where the tantrums aren't all the time for any reason. If you've watched an infant, something happens, the infant gets upset, and immediately they start to cry, and they keep crying, and it gets worse and worse and worse until something settles them. And it's a full level of cry pretty much every time. It's hard to find an infant that won't reach that full level of crying, from the moment that something upsets them. But children should be able to start to control their own emotions. They should be able to not become totally explosive, not become enraged when they get angry, completely enraged when they get angry. They should be able to start to control this to one degree or another. Okay? And emotion regulation is a skill. They have to develop it. They have to learn it. They have to practice. Okay? And the more that they practice, the more they learn, the better they become. Erikson's third stage is initiative versus guilt, and very similar to the second stage and the fourth stage. Basically, what's happening in the initiative versus guilt stage is that the child is trying new things, taking initiative, and if when they try these new things, they're allowed to try and they tend to succeed, assuming they're trying things that are age appropriate and level appropriate, they'll learn to take initiative because initiative will help them accomplish new things. If they don't, then they'll feel guilty. It's as simple as that. They will feel afraid to try new things. They'll feel afraid to experiment, and they'll be a lot more dependent rather than independent. And again, one of the big things with Erikson's theory is that early experiences tend to follow us for the rest of our lives. And if the child doesn't develop initiative now, he or she may never develop initiative. Okay, they might be the type of person that lets other people take charge, the type of person that is insecure in their abilities, the type of person that lets other people do things for them or encourages other people to do things for them because they're afraid to do things on their own, they won't take risks, etc. Okay? Now, intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. This is a topic that we touched on a little bit last chapter. Was it last chapter or the chapter before? We were talking about schools, and we were talking about the different types of schools, right? Child-centered versus teacher-directed learning. We talked about this a little bit, but it's worth sort of hashing out a little bit more now because it's an important concept. And so intrinsic motivation is inward motivation, okay, versus extrinsic motivation, which is external. So if somebody pays you to go to work and you work for the salary, then that's an extrinsic motivator. The salary is an extrinsic motivator, right? Because you're doing it for the money. If you, let's say, take a job because you love it, and yes, of course, you get paid, because if you didn't get paid, or even if you don't get paid, let's say you volunteer and you do it because you really enjoy doing this, that would be something that people would argue is intrinsically motivated. You're doing it because you love it. You're doing it because this is the thing that you want to do. You don't even need to get paid. It's intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is where, somebody's offering you something on the outside. So think about it. Think about the types of jobs that you might like to have one day. Okay. Are they extrinsically motivated jobs? Are they jobs that you're just going to make a lot of money? Or are they intrinsically motivated? Or would you like both? Ideally, we would find something that does both, something that pays a lot and something that we love doing, right? What's the saying? You work a job that you love, you never work a day in your life, or something like that. If you find a job that you love, you never work a day in your life. And that the thought is that if you do a job that's intrinsically motivated, or that you're intrinsically motivated to do, you'll be happy for the rest of your life. It wouldn't be considered work. Okay? And intrinsic and extrinsic motivators don't just have to do with work, right? It doesn't have to do with career only. Children experience a lot of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivators. Children might like a particular food. So you could offer them a cupcake or something. Oh, well, if you finish your homework, I'll give you a cupcake. And they'll work really hard to get the cupcake. That's an extrinsic motivator. Or they might have an intrinsic motivator. They really like to spend time with their older brother or their older sister. And you say, well, you know what? As soon as you finish your homework, you can go play with your older brother or your older sister. And they love playing with their older sister. So that's an intrinsic reinforcer. Okay, and that's something that's an example of intrinsic motivation, right? Something that motivates them that's internal, not external. Okay? Now, psychopathology is just a fancy word for abnormal psychology. One of the things that we can start to see at this age is if there is any underlying psychopathology, if there is any mental illness, there are sometimes signs that you can see early on, and this is the earliest age where you might see signs of abnormal behavior. Okay? There are a couple of different signs. The earliest sign are going to be emotions that tend to overwhelm the child. Now look, every child gets upset. Every child cries. Every child gets angry. Every child tantrums. That's normal. But if it seems like the child is getting emotional again and again, and it seems like it's almost like the emotions have taken on a life of their own. The emotions are pushing the behavior, not the other way around. This might be, I'm not saying definite at all, but this could be a possible indication of the potential for mental illness. Okay? Emotion regulation typically begins with impulse control, right? So basically, stopping the one's self from doing something that they shouldn't be doing. One famous example of impulse control is the Michel marshmallow story. A psychologist named Michel did this famous study where he did what he called the marshmallow test. And so he would put a young child in a room and put a marshmallow in front of them. And the instructions were, you can have one marshmallow now, or you can wait. And if you wait, you'll get two. And they would leave the child in the room for an indeterminate amount of time and then see. And eventually, some of the children would take the marshmallow and eat it right away. And some of the children would leave it and then wait for the second one. When they got the second one, they would eat both. And it was argued that the children that could maintain and not take the first marshmallow would do better in life. And actually, they did. There was a lot of research about their academic success and success in other areas of their lives. And these children who could wait, who demonstrated that impulse control tended to do much better later in life when it came to certain things than the ones who didn't. Okay? All right. So emotional balance versus imbalance, again, other demonstrations of possibility of psychopathology. Children that tend to be children that tend to be balanced more than they are imbalanced tend to be less likely to demonstrate psychopathology later in life. And then externalizing versus internalizing problems. You want a little bit of both. You want a child who externalizes certain things, meaning that they attribute what's happening to the outside world. So you don't want a child, let's say, if you have a family pet and the pet passes away, you don't want the child to blame themselves for that. Okay? Especially if the pet passes away for normal reasons, old age or health concerns, things like that. You don't want the child to sit there and say, if I was nicer to the pet, the pet wouldn't have passed away, because that's internalizing something that should be externalized. Externalizing is, look, this pet got older, they don't live forever, and ultimately this is what happens. It's a normal cycle of life, and it's sad, right? I'm going to miss them. I'm going to miss that pet forever. But ultimately it's not my fault. Versus internalizing problems, right? There needs to be a certain level of internalization. That's normal, not too much, right? So you don't want them internalizing the pet issue because, again, that's not their fault. But at the same time, you do want them to internalize certain things. If the child sits there and starts stuffing paper, starts putting paper clips in outlets, hopefully not. You're not allowed to do that. Well, Jimmy told me to. It's not my fault. No. I don't care what Jimmy tells you. Mommy told you or Daddy told you not to do that, and you did it. You put the paper clips in the outlet, right? So, again, hopefully that never happens, right? But the expectation is that there's a certain amount of internalizing and a certain amount of externalizing, never too much of one or the other, okay? Now, we talked about attachment styles, and so the flip side of that same coin is what we call parenting styles, okay? Parenting styles are the way in which a parent approaches a child, and I'm actually going to type on this slide as we're here because I'm going to add something to it, okay? Parenting styles were measured by something called discipline and warmth. Warmth and control. Discipline, control, it's kind of the same thing. And when parenting styles were originally measured, they were measured under these two dimensions, control and warmth. And each of the 4 parenting styles that are here can be measured under high control or low control and high warmth and low warmth, okay? And ideally, when we're talking about parenting styles, we want both high control and high warmth, okay? The reason for that is that you want every child, and again, I'm going to actually do some more edits while I'm going through this. You want every child to have certain rules and boundaries and certain levels of discipline. And you want every child to also know that the parent is there for them and the parent is interacting with them. And ultimately, basically, the parent is responsive to them. Okay? So forgive me while I make some edits here, just quickly. Let's see here. So, all right. So I wanted to make this a little more consistent. So warmth and control, put that back here, and then put that here. And then we'll add warmth and control here, and we'll go through each one quickly. All right, so authoritarian parents. So think of authoritarian sort of as barbarian. I don't know a better way to do that. Authoritarian parents are parents that are very high on control. So we're going to green light them for control. We do our text color here. But they're going to be very low on warmth, okay? Meaning that these parents typically really are not receptive to their children. All discipline all the time. Don't interact with them very well, don't play with them very well, but all punishment all the time, basically. And that's not something that we really, really want, because obviously it's a child that's going to think, well, I'm going to get in trouble if I do the right thing, I'm going to get in trouble if I do the wrong thing, so I might as well do the wrong thing because it's more fun. Okay? Now, permissive parenting is kind of the opposite. So permissive parenting is going to be, or permissive parents are going to be very low on control, but they're going to be very high on warmth. Okay? And you can imagine sort of what problems this causes, because the child that learns that they can do whatever the heck they want, and somebody's still going to be there with them, still going to be there to play with them and care about them. And I'm not saying you should ever show that you don't care about your child, right? Always show that you do care about the child. But at the same time, the child still needs boundaries, right? The child still needs to know, hey, you can't push mommy down the stairs. It's not okay. I'll still love you. That doesn't mean I can't get mad at you. I can. That doesn't mean that I can't punish you. I can. But there are certain things you can do. Okay? Authoritative parents, right? So these are the ones that we kind of, well, we hope for as much as we can. All right, so the authoritative parent is a parent that's demonstrating both warmth and control. Okay, so what happens with the authoritative parents is that they're receptive to the child's needs, they interact with them, they play with them, they talk to them, etc. But they also demonstrate discipline. Okay, these aren't their child's best friends, right? That's not the goal. Okay, you can be friendly to your child, but you don't want to be your child's friend. They need to understand that there's a difference between you and them. There's a power differential there, etc. And you ultimately have to demonstrate that, one person's in charge and one person is not. So you're demonstrating both control and warmth, and this is ideal, or at least research indicates that this is ideal. Okay. Lastly are the uninvolved parents, and they are pretty much just what they sound like. Okay, these are parents that have low levels of control, so they're really not paying attention to what the kid's doing, and they're not receptive. They just kind of let their kid do whatever they want. Okay, and again, you can imagine what this looks like as an adult, a child that's raised this way. They're an adult that ultimately probably is always seeking somebody who's going to interact with them, or just will be with anybody who pays attention to them, even if they're paying attention in ways that are unhealthy, right? That could certainly be the case. It could be somebody who maybe expresses this level of uninvolvement in their relationships with other people. You don't know. But research indicates that children of uninvolved parenting tend to have higher rates of anxiety, higher rates of distress, possibly higher rates of psychological disorders later on in life. There's a lot that goes into it. Okay? Now, discipline and punishment. Okay? I'm not going to tell you what to do for your child and how to fix them and everything else. And I'm not going to tell you, ideally what to do step by step, right? Because every child is different. And I don't want to come across preachy, and I don't want to come across like I know better than you, right? As parents, you know your child better than anybody does. What I will tell you is that there are a couple of things to keep in mind when we talk about discipline and punishment, and what works and what doesn't work. Okay? The first thing, let's talk about what works. Consistency. Okay? Be consistent. If not doing your homework or telling a lie is a 10-minute timeout, well, then it's a 10-minute timeout. You can't say one day that it's a 2-minute timeout because you're in a good mood and you want to go out and play with your child, and then another day it's a 3-hour timeout because you just got really mad. It's got to be consistent across the board, right? Your punishments cannot change because your mood changes. Your punishments can change because the behavior changes, but not because your mood changes. Second, punishment needs to be immediate. If a child does something wrong at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, you can't wait till Friday to punish them. Because especially a 2 to 6 year old, they have no idea what you're punishing them for. And you can sit there and say, well, remember what you did on Tuesday? They remember, but if you think about it, part of punishment is both operant conditioning, right? Consequences. But it's also a little bit of classical conditioning too, wherein you want the child to associate this thing, this punishment with that behavior, and it's really hard for a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old to associate a punishment with a behavior when the punishment happens 5 days after the behavior. They just don't learn that way. Okay. Third thing that's important: make sure that you don't lose your temper. We all get angry, right? But try not to lose your temper. Try to let the punishment be appropriate and justified. Again, consistent. But try not to lose your temper, because it's unsettling to a child and it scares them. And you don't want a child to be scared. You want a child to know this is not okay. And knowing that something's not okay and being frightened are two different things. Children are frightened over a lot more things than they let on. And adding to that fear doesn't allow the child to connect with you very well as a parent. Okay? Another thing, we forget a lot of times as parents or as adults, it doesn't have to be a parent, but we forget a lot of times as adults that to tell a child what they're allowed to do. So a lot of the times what will happen is that, a child will play and they'll break something. And we'll say, well, what were you doing? Oh, I was taking my blocks and I was throwing them against the wall. And he'll say, well, why would you do that? You're punished. Why would you broke the wall. Do you understand? You broke the wall. And the child's genuinely confused. And you're looking and say, how could they not know this? Well, I'll give you a concrete example. So friends of mine had a little boy, called the little boy Bob. And they gave Bob a play area. And they said, this is your play area. You play here, you hang out here, you do whatever you want here. And it was an area in the basement that was separated from the rest of the house. It had soft mats in case the child fell down. It had child-sized chairs, a child-sized table. It had his Legos, it had crayons, it had everything else. And they said, go ahead, play here. And they had just recently redone the whole basement where the play area was. And he was playing one day on his own. And they had come back down to check on him. And they looked and he had drawn all over the walls. And they're like, what did you do? Bob, what did you do? And they were so mad at Bob. They were so mad at Bob. And what's the truth? Bob did exactly what they told him to do. They said, this is your area, do what you want. He wanted to draw on the walls. Fantastic. He did exactly what you told him to do. Okay, so one of the things to understand is that we as parents, we don't do a very good job at telling children what they can do. Right? We tell them what they can't, usually after they've done it, but we don't tell them that they can. And now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is going to work every time. But what I am saying is that you can greatly reduce the amount of things your child does wrong if they know that these things are wrong. Kids purposely aren't out to get us, okay? So that sometimes they're going to test you. Sometimes they will do things that they shouldn't do just to see what's going to happen. She said, don't do this. What's going to happen if I do? Well, let me try it and see. And so they're testing you not as a challenge. They're testing you because they want to find out what's going to happen next. Okay? All right. Next thing. What works and what doesn't work. So some newer research indicates that punishments actually don't work at all. And I won't say much more about that because I know people are going to have a strong reaction to that where they're going to say, well, what am I supposed to do? And you're telling, I was punished when I was a kid and that certainly helped. And yes, I'm just telling you what the research said. Newer research said that punishment doesn't seem to have a long-term lasting benefit or doesn't seem to create long-term behavior change. So what can you do? One thing that you can do, and it's a hard thing to do, is catch the child being good. Okay? And I'm not saying it's going to work every time. But if you see your child doing something that they're supposed to be doing, catch them doing that thing. And when they're doing it, reinforce that some way, right? So if your child is playing nicely with blocks and you want the child to play by themselves nicely with blocks, when they're playing nicely with blocks, go on over and play with them. If they don't want to play with you, they will make it known. But most of the time, children do. And the child will learn playing with blocks is fun, and mommy can play with me, or daddy can play with me. And you know what? I enjoy it. And, you might not be able to play blocks with them next time, but the time after you might be able to. But think about it the other way. So the child's playing with blocks by themselves, and you're like, well, I don't want to bother them. They're finally quiet. They're finally behaving. And I don't want to bother them, and I'll leave them alone. Well, what's going to happen? Eventually they're going to get tired or frustrated or bored, and then they're going to tantrum, and they're going to act out. And then you're going to have to punish them. But what if you played with blocks with the child before they acted out? And then you noticed when the child was starting to get tired or frustrated, and then you did something else with them. Said, hey, okay, time to go for a nap, or time to do something different, before they got to that point of explosion. If you can intervene before, then there's no reason that you'll have to discipline after. Okay? So the things that work, right? Consistency. Right, the punishment should fit the crime. The punishment should be immediate. Give them clear rules and boundaries. Tell them what they're not only not allowed to do, but what they are allowed to do. And then also talk to them about, catch them being good. Okay? All right, let's talk about gender development a little bit, and then I'll end the video here. It'll be a little bit of a shorter one. But let's talk about gender development. The first thing I want to talk about is a little bit of vocabulary. I want to talk about the difference between sex and gender. Okay? Sex is defined by the physical parts that you have. Okay? So males, sex, have penis, testicles, prostate, etc. Females, sex, have vagina, ovaries, uterus, fallopian tubes, etc. Okay? That is sex. That's not gender. All right? Gender is going to be, in essence, your socially defined roles as far as male or female. So the gender role of a stereotypical male, and I'm giving you a very simple explanation for this because it's a lot more complicated than what I'm saying. And it's gotten more complicated as time has gone on. But I'm giving you a very, very basic cursory introduction to this. Gender is going to be the socially defined roles that males and females play. Okay? So when we talk about gender, we're talking about, the whole matriarchal versus patriarchal society. What do men do? What are women supposed to do? Males, again, stereotypically, gender stereotypically, they watch sports, they wrestle, they build with their hands. Females, typically, gender, they wear makeup and dresses and things like that, okay? And again, this is gender roles. That's not the same thing as sex, okay? Sex is biologically determined, okay? Gender is a lot more fluid than that. Okay? And people have what we call a gender identity, and that is how you identify. Do you identify as male or female? And recently we've been at least becoming more aware of the fact of gender disparities. Now, when we talk about gender disparities, we're talking about gender in the workforce, disparities of pay, and we're also talking about things like Caitlyn Jenner, right? Who was born sex male. So Caitlyn Jenner was born with all the male parts. But Caitlyn Jenner has said that she is gender female. Okay? She feels like a woman, and she is a woman inside. And she's saying she's always been a woman, she's just had to hide it. Because it was embarrassing. Think about it this way. Think about it as though she was born a woman, but with a penis. And so everybody just assumed she was a guy, even though she was a woman. Okay? That's the easiest way I could explain it. And we would say that in that case, she had gender identity disorder, where her gender identity didn't match her physical parts. So she has gone through a physical change. She has gone on hormones, medications, and she has had surgery to remove certain parts, right? And to make her physical sex match her gender. Now, one thing to understand when I'm talking about the difference between gender and sex is that a lot of people misuse the term. So when they say gender disparities or the gender gap in pay, it gets a little iffy what they're referring to. Because typically when they're referring to gender, they actually are saying sex. So they're saying the gender gap in pay, they're saying, well, males. But they're typically referring to sex males. Because you don't ever know who anybody is, under their clothes, right? Or inside or internally, right? Somebody could look outwardly male. And again, when their appearance of being male is going to be that gender role, that gender appearance. Or they can look outwardly female, and we're talking about their gender roles, dress, makeup, longer hair, etc. But what is their sex? Their sex might not match. Ideally, your gender and your sex match. And people will even say that there's more than two genders, right? And again, I'm certainly not an expert on it, so I don't want to go too far beyond what I'm telling you now because I don't want to misrepresent or say something that's wrong. But understand that sex are going to be the physical parts, and gender is going to be sort of what's inside, internally, how you identify. Okay? Gender identities, so who you are inside, they tend to develop very, very early on. And most of the research, or pretty much all the research, basically says that your gender identity for most people is stable. Now, there are people who are gender fluid, which means in certain circumstances their gender changes, or certain times their gender changes. But for most of us, our gender is stable and consistent throughout our entire lives, and our gender identity forms very, very early. And there are articles on top of articles where we talk about children, little children. I'm talking about between the ages of 3 and 4, that that might be born sex male and identify as gender female, and they just are, and there's nothing that we can do to change that. Now, that's different from a little boy that kind of likes to put on mommy's nightgowns and things like that, and maybe even play with lipstick or play with nail polish and stuff like that. That's different. Playing with that stuff because it's colorful and it's fun and it's interesting and it's unique is very different than the understanding. I don't want to say deciding, because gender is not really a choice. It's very different than knowing that the gender that people think you are is not your gender. Okay? Again, I don't want to talk too much more about that because I'm far from an expert in gender identity studies and gender issues. So I don't want to go too much beyond that. So we'll stop there. But that's it for this chapter. This is a little bit of a shorter one, and they'll tend to get faster as we go on because a lot of the foundations we've learned earlier. Okay? What I want you to do for your assignment, for your deliverable for this week, is I want you to deliver a very, very brief summary of an article. I'm going to post the article in Documents and Other on Blackboard, and I'll post instructions there. And I basically want you to just do a very, very brief summary of that article. It's an article actually on autism. I'm assuming it's going to be the one on autism unless I find something different between now and when I post it, but it's an article on autism, and I basically just want you to highlight a couple of different things with the article because I think it's interesting. It's also a peer-reviewed article, and I think you should start getting used to reading peer-review articles. This one some of them can be really confusing. This one's less confusing, but it's still a little bit complicated at times. So I'll give you that article, and you can take a look at it, and hopefully just give sort of a brief feedback and a brief summary of the article. Okay, and I'll have you post that on Blackboard. All right. Okay. Hopefully you're having a good week, and as usual, if there are any questions, always email me. Email me through the Kingsborough email. Posting messages on Blackboard I don't always get them right away. Okay. All right. I will see you guys soon.